What we have this character that is running toward. Before he goes into the jump, what it is that you observe is happening around this part right here. I'm going back and forth between this part. What do you think is happening at this moment here? Can we see where before he jumps, he's preparing to jump, right? And what we call this the antic or anticipation. You see, if we had the character running towards the river and he was to somehow magically just jump, like let's say he was, if you realize the character is going upwards because this is his normal run, you know, he first goes up and then he goes down and then he shoots himself off the ground. So instead of what some persons would have done was just gone ahead and just go straight into that pose and have him jump over the river. However, what some animators would go ahead and do that without doing the anticipation. But what we want to do as animators is we want to strive at a level where we get a little bit more realism, a little bit more believability when we're animating our characters. And in order for him to make a jump, like, because if you look at the distance in which he has to cover in order to jump over the river, it's a very far distance. He would need, if you do physics, if you're from high school, if you remember from physics, there is something called potential energy and you have kinetic energy. So in order for him to be able to accomplish this jump, he would have needed to build up a lot of potential energy in order to actually jump over, to be successful in jumping over this large distance. If it was a shorter distance, it would require less potential energy to actually convert that to kinetic energy to jump over the water. So there are two types of antics that is happening here. The first antic is that he's going up. And then, so that is the first anticipation. The second anticipation is that he goes down. And then he shoots off into the action. So it's an anticipation for an antic. What I'm going to do, let me see if I can share the 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 jump image. Hold on. Let us look at this. This is taken from the Richard Williams survival kit. And what it shows the main key poses of a jump. Here we have the key poses of the character going into the run. And then here we have the other key poses of the character accomplishing the jump. Now, if we look, this first pose here is the contact pose for the run. And then now we set up another contact where we set up this second pose here. Let me see if I can turn off Ringo and zoom in. Now there are little notes for each of these key poses. So here the first pose demonstrates that he's running in. The second pose says that he goes up to go down. So in other words, this second key pose here, it is a anticipation because he's preparing to go up before he can go down. This third key pose is saying he goes down to go up. So he has to go down, you know, and when he goes down, you see this knee that is bent here, a lot of potential energy is being built up into that knee. You know, like when you have a spring and you squeeze down on that spring, there's a lot of potential energy that is built up in that spring, so that when you release off of that spring, it just releases all of that kinetic energy. So the same thing with his legs. A lot of energy is being built up into this knee, and this leg straightens out to help to propel him over and over the object. this is a very important key pose that we have here. Notice how they pose the character. Your character has to develop what you call a proper silhouette. Now, a silhouette is like a dark shadow object or a person, and if we were to darken this pose out into a silhouette, you are supposed to be able to identify what that person is doing. So we can clearly see that the arms are posed back here. We can see that this arm is posed up here. We can see that this leg is posed here. Not only that, but we also have a good line of action. And line of action is like an imaginary line that runs through the character. Notice that if I was to take a line, let me see if I can draw on this. Hold on, unlock it. All right, if I was to draw, I'm drawing with the mouse, so see with me. Look at what I'm drawing. You see that? That is what you call the line of action for that particular key pose. Now it's important that you have a well-defined line of action which can help to establish your key pose. Notice how it is a nice curve that runs through the body of this pose. Let us look at the line of action here. We have a nice line of action going down right here. We have a line of action right here. It's a line of action. So it's pretty much the imaginary line that runs through the character. If we look at this key pose here, which is what, if you remember from the bouncing ball, it deals with more like the hang time. When the ball is bouncing, you have a lot of hang time at the arc of the jump. Notice that there's also a line of action. If I was to draw from here, and we have a nice curve right there. So that is the line of action of that key pose. Same thing here. There's a line of action established. I think it would kind of go down like that. And then there's another defined line of action here, which is a nice curve. So I'm going to remove all. So you want to, when you're posing your character, you want to make sure that you establish a nice line of action. When you're doing digital animation where you have to draw with your pencil or you have to draw with your drawing tablet, it is easy to start off by establishing the line of action of the character's key pose because you're drawing, because you can create nice arcs with your pencil. However, if you're using cutout characters, it can be a bit difficult to establish the line of action for your key poses. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that. I'm going to zoom out and I'm going to turn on the Ringo character again. Now, I want you to look closely at the character. All right, for this key pose, notice that this key pose matches up with this one here. This one is okay in terms of its line of action because we can see the line of action running down the character. So let's go to another pose. All right, you can see that this there's kind of a line of action. This is what I want you to look. Look at the torso of the character, how it has a nice arc right here. This character rig that I was using at the time, it was difficult for me to actually create an arc in the torso because at the time there was no deformers on the rig. However, I modified the character rig where I placed a deformer on the torso, and that enabled me to actually, all right, let me go to the hang time pose and show you. So this pose right here, where the character is like this, you can see that it matches right here. Notice how we're seeing a nice arc in the torso here. However, when we look at the torso of this character, notice how it's very straight. Look at how the character is bent. The character would actually be posing. If the deformer was enabled on this character, I would pose the character having a nice arc in his torso. It would help to establish the line of action. This pose here, if you realize it doesn't match up precisely with what is happening with that in terms of the torso. Notice that the torso has a nice arc right here, but the torso is very straight. So those were some of the limitations in which I had to deal with. Notice that when he bends down here, we're not seeing that nice arc in the torso. Same thing here. But notwithstanding, I was still able to pose the character as closely as possible in accordance with the reference material. This is what I also want you to notice as well. Notice that when he lands, I just don't land him stationary like that. If you were to get up and jump and then land on your feet, you're going to realize that you have a little bounce at the end. So it's like a little, you know, like a car would have suspension when you're driving that car and it hits a speed bump, it goes up and then it bounces. It's the same thing with us as humans. When we jump and we land on our feet, we just don't land stationary like that. There's a little up and down movement. It's called a settle. So you have to settle into the jump. So when he lands right here, bam, and then he comes down into that. Notice that how he goes down and then he comes back up again, and then notice at the very end he has a little bit of movement. Notice that there when he comes up, there's a little bit of movement on the hands, and there's a little bit of subtle movement with the head. This is what me notice that he's now moving forward. So what let me just speed up it like he said like that. So when you're doing your jump, you want to incorporate the character settling into the jump. Just don't have the character land and then just come to a complete dead stop. You want to have the character settle nicely into the jump when he lands, so that can create a level of believability. When you add these little details, it is what separates the animators. It's what can separate a good animator from an average animator, because we could have simplified this jump. We could have not put in any anticipation. We could have not put in any settle, and we just have the character jumping. Well, you know, that would just be an average effort into making the jump believable. However, it depends on the situation. So for example, you're doing a job for a client and they want you to do a character jumping, and they want it on a short notice. Maybe the client will be satisfied with the jump if he doesn't have a settle or if he doesn't have an anticipate. Them just want to show a character jumping. And if the client is satisfied with that, then you can give the client that. However, if it is that you want to put value into your animation, we're talking about a higher level of animation, like what is done in terms of industry standard. You want to incorporate those principles into your animation. You want to have your anticipation. You want to make sure that you have appropriate spacing and timing. Make sure that there's secondary action when it comes to your animation. For example, I can even go back to the example where Jason posted into the WhatsApp group. Very good animation in terms of, like, I think he was doing it. I was asking him about it and he was doing it for a video game. And I told him that I like the fact that he was able to put secondary action on the clothing. Like when the character is walking, you could see that secondary action on the clothing. However, there were some parts of the animation that remained static. So for example, the color wasn't moving. So like when he's walking like in an up and down movement, that should have been moving with the character as well. But so what I'm saying is that there's always room for improvement when you're doing animation. And animators are very critical of each other in terms of criticizing work. I'm talking about providing constructive criticism of another animator's work. So for example, you could tell them to, hey, this area needs to improve. You need to improve the timing here. The timing looks a bit slow. So that is what you need. That is the level, that is the, how should I say? The work ethic. That is what I'm trying to convey to you now. There's a particular work ethic in which is acceptable at a higher standard when it comes to animating. You can do simple animation. For example, when you look at South Park, they just have the characters rocking side by side. That is their style of animation, you know. And that is subjective in a way. That's like one animator might look at that and say, hey, I don't like that style. But a lot of persons watch South Park. By the way, South Park is cutout animation. A lot of persons watch South Park and it's like, for me personally, I prefer animation that is more refined, more fluid. It's kind of more like of a preference. But other persons would look at a South Park and they watch it for the entertainment value. And once they're getting that entertainment value in the story and that aspect of it, persons may not necessarily worry about the aesthetics of how animation flows and how fluid the animation looks. So for example, that's also another aspect. You want to I know I'm going a bit off tangent here, but it's just things that I'm touching on. Like for example, you want to ensure that when you're animating, you could have a very fluid animation, but the story content behind it is not intriguing. And you say, yes, that's very nice animation, but there's no emotional connection to with the audience with the anime. So it's a wide area in terms of trying to get appeal and so forth. All right. So I'm going to touch more on how you go about doing a jump. And this not only applies for 2D animation, it is the same concept for 3D animation because you would still need to utilize all of the poses. So going down, you have the takeoff, the hang time, the contact. So all of these would still be posed with a 3D character. It's just that we're using a 2D cutout rig. All right, I'm going to share my screen with you. I'm going to share another one on my screen. Hold on. All right, so relates to type of poses. This is just a recap. So for example, your types of poses, you have your key poses. And your key poses, just like you saw with the jump that I was illustrating a while ago, you start off with the main key poses, which are the storytelling drawings. Then you have your breakdown poses. These are poses that go in between the key poses. And then you have your in-betweens. These are additional drawings that help to smooth out the drawings of your animation. Now, when you're doing the digital animation technique, you would first have to start off by drawing all of those key poses. Then you have to put in the breakdown poses, and then you start to fill in the in-between poses. When you're doing cutout animation, you would start off, yes, you would start off with the key poses. But the good thing about cutout, why it's so popular, especially for episodes, where you want to push out a lot of episodes, the computer helps to generate the breakdown poses, and it helps to generate the in-between. For this jump that I did, there were some breakdown poses that I had to put in order to make the jump transition better. But For the most part, if you put in your key poses, the software will help to generate the in-betweens for you. Hence, it cuts down a lot of time. This is just like a workflow showing the different stages, starting off with the storyboards. Your storyboards would contain your key poses and your extremes and your breakdowns, also known as passing positions. Then you have your in-between, your straight ahead runs on different parts. So it's like a step going down. Like you have 1, 2, 3, 4. Down here would be your in-between. It was just a animation. So for example, you could get a storyboard like this as an animator, and the storyboard artist would just illustrate 3 main key poses. He has one key pose where the character is walking towards the board. Then we have a second key pose, which illustrates that he is taking up the chalk. Then we have a third key pose that shows him writing on the board. Now, if you look at these 3 drawings, you as the audience can fill in the rest of the information. So if an animator was to get this storyboard, he would know what to do with it. Because what happens is that you have the most important drawings that tell the story, that gives the information. All right, look at it this way. Imagine if we didn't have this second key pose here. We just had the first key pose and the second key pose. Your interpretation of this would be that he's just walking towards the chalkboard and writing on it. But this very important piece of information on your key pose demonstrates that while he was walking towards the board, he stopped and he took up a chalk, and then he got up and walked towards the board. So having the appropriate key poses, so this is from the standpoint of the storyboard artist communicating with the animator. The storyboard artist is communicating with the animator with just these 3 key poses, and he's able to fill in the in-between. So for example, if I was to give this to you, you would be able to animate it. Because you as the animator know that you need to insert your 5 key poses for the walk. You know that you would need your down position, your passing position, your up position, and back into another contact position with the and leg switch. So you're going to continue to fill in those in-betweens until you reach here. Then when you reach here now, you see the second key pose, you know that, hey, wait, he's now going to bend down. Now you're going to start to generate in-betweens with him bending down. However, you don't know how someone looks when they're bending down. So instead of animating this from your mind or using your imagination, what you can do is have your co-worker get up and walk and pick up something, and you video it and you study that video, and then from that video now you can figure out how someone bends down to pick up a chalk, and then now he's going to get up again. You don't know how exactly he would get up. You can use your imagination, but it's best to video somebody or use reference material. Then you have that person get up and you video how that person, then you animate them walking towards the board. Here, you put in your extremes. You put your extreme showing him bending down, put the extreme with him getting up and then walking towards the board. Down poses. So you realize this is doing it the traditional way, you know. Once you're drawing, you're going to put in all of these drawings. In-betweens. If we were doing the animation, all you would have to do is put in your key poses and some of your extremes. And what would happen is the showing him getting down, coming up back, walking towards the board. Reinforce the knowledge as it relates to key poses and the in-between. Let us look at the main key poses of a jump. Now, we know that we have key poses to a walk. The 5 main key poses to a walk are your contact, your down, your passing position, up, and back into a contact again. And once you establish those key poses, you can create, or you can then do the other step and copy and paste. And you can generate a A to B walk, or you can generate a walk cycle if you want the camera to track the movement of the character with the background panning behind it. Same thing with a run. A run is similar to a walk. A run, oh, somebody was asking a question. I see something in the chat a while ago. All right. So there's 7 main key poses to a jump. Well, it depends on how you want to start off the jump. In this case, the character is not standing. He's actually running into a jump, which makes it a more complex action. Let me just move forward. What we have in this lesson here is that we have key poses demonstrating how a character would, from a standing position, would transition into a jump. These first key poses, by the way, this is taken from the Richard Williams survival kit, and it showcases a character getting ready to jump. So these are the first key poses. Notice that the character is standing here. Then we have the anticipation. The character has to go down before he goes up. This down here, don't pay this any mind just as yet. I'm going to explain what this is. What this pretty much is just an exaggerated version of the jump. All right. So after this is the second part of the jump. We have the hang time here, where the character is in mid-air. Then we have the landing pose, where he meets in contact with the ground. Now look at this key pose now. You realize that you're seeing 3 legs instead of 2. What Richard Williams was trying to demonstrate here is that you can have a variation in your jump. You could have one where both legs are in contact when he's landing, or you could delay it or offset it where you have one foot is in contact with the ground while the other is still in the air, is still bent in the air. So it was giving you an option. So it's not to say that the character has 3 legs. It's just showing you that there could be what it says right here, could delay a foot. So he's saying that you can offset it by delaying the foot, so that when he transitions into his squash pose, you see that delay in the foot, but that is optional. We have the contact pose here, and then we have where the character goes back to his normal pose. So come about with 7 key poses. You're standing, your antic, what I call it takeoff or slash your stretch pose. You have your hang time pose, your contact pose, your squash pose, and your settle pose. So when you're doing a jump, there can be a total of 7 main key poses that can be used to initiate a jump. You start off, notice you realize that you're seeing numbers on the top of their head, above the key pose. The standing pose right here has the number 1 over it. What this is saying is that this key pose happens at frame number 1. Now, so in other words, Richard Williams is giving you the timing information where the key poses will occur at. So keyframe number 1 is the standing pose. Keyframe number 7 is the antic pose. Remember, he has to go down before he goes up. Keyframe number 11 is the take off or the stretch pose. Number 17 is the hang time pose. Keyframe number, what is this? 23 is when he's landing. Keyframe 27 is when he's in the squash. And keyframe 37 is where, or frame number 37 is where he goes back into his settle. So Richard Williams, from his own experimenting, because what Richard Williams did was to experiment with the timing for the jump. You can come up with your own timing for the jump. You can do it by either experimenting with the timing, or what you can do is you can take your phone or a video recorder and video yourself jumping or video someone else. So you are obtaining your own reference material and you're going to study that. What I like to do is like I like to video certain actions, and then I would like to open up QuickTime movie player, because QuickTime movie player allows for you to go frame by frame through the video and examine each of the key poses on a frame by frame basis. So you go through and then you say, okay, the standing pose happens at frame 1. Maybe in the video, the standing pose, he takes time to go into the antic. It takes a total of 10 frames to go into the antic. Then it takes 5 frames to go into the standing pose. So you can work out your own timing by videoing your own actions, or you can use Richard Williams' formula. Richard Williams is from the book. So using a book is also using material. Even some of the most skilled animators have to rely on reference. Reference materials are very important, because if you were to sit down and say you're going to animate something out of your head, or yes, you may be successful, but you run a risk of getting errors. We're talking about mitigating or minimizing errors in your animation, and utilizing reference materials can help to reduce those issues and errors that you see in animations. All right, if you look below each of these key poses, you're seeing some additional numbers. Like for example, you're seeing 1, 3, 5, 7. Now, what you're seeing below these characters is referred to as a timing chart. Now, a timing chart demonstrates the time, the timing information, the visual representation of the timing information, and it's also a visual representation of the spacing, because remember, our principle of animation is spacing and timing. So a timing chart, so notice that there are several timing charts below the character. These timing charts help to establish what the spacing information should be and what the timing information should be. Now look closely at this. Notice that number 1 has a wider space between number 3. So what is saying that there should be a wider space in here between frame number 1 and frame number 3. 3, 5, and 7. These drawings should be closely spaced together. Notice that we're seeing number 7 here. Now he's demonstrating the timing information from frame number 7 to frame number 11. Notice that the spacing between 7, 9, and 11, they have even spacing. So notice that there's wide spacing here, and then you have these are clustered together. Notice that this spacing is evenly spaced. Notice that you have a wide spacing here, and then these are clustered together. Same thing. So notice that these are clustered together, because remember, with a hang time, your drawings must be closely spaced together, because he's slowing down at the peak of the jump. That is why you see 17, 19, and 21. These are individual drawings, by the way. These drawings are closely spaced together, while drawing number 23 is spaced further away. The reason why 23 is spaced further away from 21 is because when he's landing, he's going to be, gravity is pulling him down. hence he will be moving much faster. And in order to create a animation that is moving much faster, your drawings have to be spaced further away from each other. That is why 21 is further spaced from 23. Now, from 23 into 27, you have even spacing. 23, 25, 27, evenly spaced. Notice that 27 to 37, you have even spacing here, but 33 to 37 are closely spaced together. So this is one way in which Richard Williams was trying to communicate the spacing and timing information of the key poses. Let's talk about the second variation of the jump. Now, you notice that it pretty much, the formula is somewhat the same. However, there are other principles of animation that can add appeal. You have principles of squash and stretch. If you look at the first illustration of the key poses at the top, you notice that yes, the character is posed out as how he should be. And we're seeing some amount of squash and we're seeing some amount of stretch on the character. But this is now going towards a more cartoony style of animation, where notice how a lot of exaggeration. By the way, exaggeration is another principle of animation that is used to bring appeal to your animation. So, for example, you ever watch those cartoons where you see the wolf and those cards like Bugs Bunny and one of those characters, they see a beautiful female and you realize that them eyes bulge out to the extreme and the jaws drop down to the extreme. That is because the animator wants to exaggerate how much that character admires the female. He's exaggerating that this character is very much lusting over that female. So that is why you see an exaggeration with the jaw stretching and it dropping to the ground, and you see the eyes bulging out, and you see him staggering all over the place. That is exaggeration to bring forward a sense of appeal. And that it's all about communication. You're communicating to the audience that this character is deeply in love with that female. Here, what the animator is trying to convey is that this character is putting more effort into the jump. Here, when we look at this first jump, we can see that yes, the character is putting effort into the jump by going into the ante. But you want to really communicate that he's giving it his all. He's giving it 150%. Hence, to communicate, you need to exaggerate your key poses a bit more. So notice that Richard Williams look at what he did with the facial expression. Notice that the face looks, you can see that he's frowning here, but you can see that here he's really putting a lot of effort into it. Notice the hands, how the hands come up versus how the hands go backwards. Notice this is a break. This is what? You see this number 10? This number 10 is what you call a breakdown. So before we had our main key poses. So instead of just putting like, you can transition from 7 to 12. But what he did, he put a breakdown pose where notice that the legs are still in contact with the ground. They're still bent, you know. In fact, he actually goes down a bit more because we can see where the legs bend a bit more. Here is where the principle of stretch come into play. The bottom part of the leg is squashed and the upper body is stretched. Notice the face, how the head is stretched, how the neck is stretched, how the arms are stretched down. That is exaggeration in the making. Then we transition into this key pose. Notice this key pose and this key pose down here is more exaggerated. Notice how you see the legs, how they have the toe point bent right here. But notice that his toe points are not even bent. He's now on the very tip toe of his, so there's more exaggeration here. He's extending more. Look at the head part. The head, and you're not even seeing the neck right here. But if you look here, you see that the neck is stretched. You can see that the arms are down. So he's putting more effort into the jump. Notice that we have the hang time. Notice that it's just a different variation, but he has an arc, but it's communicated with the hands. It's communicated with the head versus the torso. Notice that his head actually goes into his body and his shoulders actually shrug up. So he's actually feeling the impact of the jump. Notice here, he's starting to animate the clothing of the character. The shirt comes up. Notice the position of the hip. Notice that the hip is right here, but the hip is all the way up here. Notice the pants. The pants coming up. Everything is exaggerated more. Notice when he lands, this is another breakdown. 22 is a breakdown. You put a breakdown in between. Because normally you would transition between the landing and the squash. But here you have the landing. They put this breakdown where the hands, the arms extend out like that, and then he goes down into the squash. The character is squashed right here, but he's squashed even more. This number 32 is another breakdown because when he goes up, he has to go. Notice that they're stretching up a little bit before he goes back into his normal key pose. And by the way, you would have realized that the final drawing here is 37, while the final drawing here is 40. So what he did, he added more